All right, what's going on, everybody? This is gfunkyboxing. This is where you come for that real boxing talk. Today, we're going to talk. You see the thumbnail here, all right? And I'm being joined by my main man, Calix, Boxing 2.0. What's going on, Calix?
I'm good. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely, man. You got, what do they call it? Carte blanche here. Anytime you want to jump on, you just, let me know, man, and I'll send you the link right away. For all you guys that are in the chat, don't forget, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Don't forget to do that, all right? And if you do subscribe, hit that notification bell, all right? We already got some action in the chat. Let's go ahead and check it out real quick before we talk about the topic here. Sonia Dumas says, David Benavidez, big bully, only fights way smaller than himself. David Benavidez ducked better beef. I mean, was that ever a fight? I don't ever recall. I don't ever recall that even being talked about, but okay. El Chito's here. What's up, bro? He says, saludos, raza. My man Jesus M is here. He says, saludos. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. So I want to play a video here. My man Calix, all right? My man Calix right here is blowing up, all right, over on Twitter. He comes on and looks like he's hunting for Bigfoot or something. I don't know. He's out there in the woods. But he has a nice following going on right now on Twitter with these videos here. So let's go ahead and listen to what he has to say here, and then we'll go from there.
If you look at the betting odds, there's no value in betting Benavidez because he's a minus 2,000 favorite. So you get nothing for your money if he wins. If you bet on Lemieux, you're throwing your money away because this fight is set up for Benavidez to look good. And being that it's set up for Benavidez to look good, there's no value in this for boxing fans because we're not going to know anything about Benavidez after the fight that we didn't know before. So it's sort of a waste of a fight, but at least he's staying active, right? Look, I'm tired of the small violin players when it comes to guys like Benavidez and Andre. Benavidez is only 25 years old, I'm hearing. Look, Benavidez has been a pro since 2013. He was good enough to fight in a title fight 3 years ago. Age is not an excuse. Also, he could have lost to Canelo by now had he kept that WBC strap that he lost on the scale. It's Benavidez's fault he lost that WBC strap that would have leveraged him into a big payday with Canelo. But I know Canelo's ducking Benavidez, right? But I'm convinced that Benavidez and guys like Benavidez and Andre don't really have fans. Because if Andre had real fans, they would have been praising him for going across the pond and moving up in weight, going across the pond and fighting a legit top 10 super middleweight in Zach Parker in his home country. But they didn't. And the reason they didn't is because the only time they mention Andre's name is when it comes to Canelo and Golovkin. So I have to assume, read between the lines and assume that Andre doesn't really have fans. These people are just using Andre's name and using him as a tool to devalue fighters such as Canelo and Golovkin. I don't know what else to think of it, but save me the small violins for guys like Andre and Benavidez. But Benavidez by whatever he wants this week.
All right. Now, I agree with a lot of what you said there. By the way, guys, let me get it right here. Follow my man at Calix Boxing 2.0 on Twitter. Make sure you guys do that. Now, where I had the issue was with, and I talked about this, and we got a comment here, and I want to highlight this. What's going on, Stefan? I see you here. Thanks for joining us. Jesus says exactly what I had said to you on that thread, that Benavidez will be the mandatory. And he did make weight today. This is 3 fights in a row now he's made weight. So I feel
166.
like
166. Yeah. Got to give it to him. So
I feel like at this point we should kind of let that go. Now I know some fans probably won't, but I feel like we should let that go now. Like he that was back in 2020, August of 2020. We're almost 2 years away from that now. And he said, when we talked to him, he said, hey, I can still make the weight. It was just something that happened with the bubble and all that type of stuff. But as far as the mandatory goes, now I know you said you didn't like this fight. And I said, hey, look, it's for a mandatory, man. So let me know what's on your mind, brother.
Okay, so first, we could be looking at this from 2 different points of view because, and I'm very vocal and transparent about this on my channel, I always come at things from a boxing fan standpoint. My mission statement for the channel is I look out for my interests as a boxing fan, and I look out for boxing fans' interests. So other people may be looking at it from the interests of David Benavidez, which, okay, but I look at it from a different vantage point. And let me frame it this way. I look at boxing this way: when you have different buckets, right? You have managers, promoters, network execs here in that bucket. Then you have sanctioning bodies in this bucket. Then you have fighters in this bucket. And then you have boxing fans in another bucket. I think managers, promoters, boxing network execs, A-side fighters have done a great job of programming boxing fans into talking like managers, promoters, network execs, and A-side fighters. And I know you've noticed the difference in the past 10, I've been here 12 years on YouTube. You notice the difference in how people talk. When we first came on the YTBC, more people spoke in the mind frame of the boxing fan. And the same thing on boxing Twitter. When I was on it 12 years ago, we spoke as boxing fans. Now it seems like everyone is talking about it in the interest of a particular fighter, a particular network. Look, man, I'm just a dude working hard during the week. I want to crack open a cold one on a Friday and Saturday night and watch a good fight. So to me, the enemy is anything that's an obstacle in the way of that. Anything in the obstacle of me watching a good fight is my enemy. The only thing I watch, G-Funky, is boxing, college football, and King of Queens reruns. That's all I watch on TV.
I love the King of Queens. I got the whole series. I got the whole series on DVD, bro. That's a great series.
It's a great show. Great show. Yeah. But that's all I watch. And being that it's all I watch, I don't like when something gets in the way of me seeing a good fight. I just don't. I don't like it. So I come at everything from my own interests. And I feel like that's not selfish. It's not selfish for me. Look, fighters are making great money now to fight average fighters. Look, fighters are being treated better now than ever before. But when you put too much in one of those buckets, you're taking away naturally from one of the other buckets. You can't have all those buckets full. Like, we're not all going to be happy. So I'm interested in filling up the fan bucket as much as possible. I want my own interests served. And that's the only way we're going to have a sustainable sport, is if we're all being served and it's everybody's at least a little bit happy, and we all can have a sustainable sport. I bring that up. I just had to frame it that way because I'm looking at this when I do this video, and people might say, oh, it does provide value to David Benavidez because he's the mandatory. That's not how I look at it as a fan. I look at it as Benavidez versus Lemieux isn't a good fight for two reasons. One, he's a minus 2,000 favorite. So as a betting guy, I get no value off of that.
Nothing. Yeah, there's nothing there.
Because I can't bet Benavidez, and then Lemieux's not going to win the fight because it's set up for Benavidez to look good. So then it serves no interest for me as a boxing fan either, because I'm not going to know anything different about Benavidez on Sunday that I don't know sitting here on Friday. I just don't know anything different, right? So it just serves no purpose for me other than Benavidez is active again. And that's good for boxing because he is a talented guy. So I guess in a way it serves a purpose there. But other than that, man, I guess we can start off from that and go, because I have some other points, but I want to hear what you say about that. But there are some other points as far as track record that I have as well for some of these fighters at 160 and 168. And you said 147 has been a dumpster juice division, but 160 and 168 aren't far behind. I mean, besides north of 154, G-Funky, what has there been to be excited about other than Canelo fights?
And Jermell becoming undisputed last week.
Right. That division, 154 is a great division. 154 is a great division. But north of it, there's not much going on. 160 and 168. Guys are mixing it up at 175. But other than that, not much.
No. Shout out to Nancy of the Boxing Republic. Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday night. You know, like Kalik said, we're just two hardworking guys that want to crack open some cold ones and watch the King of Queens. All right.
Hardworking man.
Now, my thing is this. And I've seen a lot of people trashing the fight, and not that you necessarily trashed it. And I really do understand your point of view, and I do agree
I
that
trashed
like
it.
this is
I
not,
trashed it.
yeah, this is not uh, a fight that is a good matchup. Like
Mhm.
the only thing that Lemieux brings to the table in this fight is, like you said, an opportunity for Benavidez to become mandatory in the WBC, and he's still got power. Like that's one thing we know for sure with Benavidez. Even a guy like Triple G didn't want to go toe to toe with this guy because he knew that he could have got caught with something big and it could have been lights out. So, and another thing I want to talk about, a point you made was that how you said I probably won't know anything different about Benavidez Sunday after the fight. One thing that we could find out, and this is a could, if he does get hit by something big with Lemieux, will he be able to take it? And if he does, then we know he could take a good shot because we know that Lemieux is a bona fide puncher, man. If anything, defensively, he's not the best. You
He's
know,
gonna have look. He's gonna have trouble setting up punches tomorrow night.
yes, he will because I think a guy like Benavidez who um, throws a lot of punches, changes up the variation of his punches as well, speed, all that good stuff. He's going to have to try to exchange. I just don't think he's quick off the trigger like that. Even a prime Lemieux would have trouble with David Benavidez,
Yeah.
in my opinion. But I'll say this: I hear this a lot, and look, I agree. Guys need to earn their spot. D-Style Boxing in the chat. What's going on, man? Um, he's doing the best that he can. Like when he missed weight against Angulo in August of 2020, he lost his belt. Since then, he's fought Ellis. He fought Kyron Davis, who was a fill-in for Uskateki, who tested positive for, I believe it was EPO, I believe, but I have to go back and check. It was some sort of steroid he tested positive for.
Yeah, it was.
So he was a fill-in. And then now he's fighting David Lemieux. So this is, according to him, this is 3 eliminators that he's fought in for the WBC. Now, he said, hey, look, I know I messed up. That's 100% on me. He took accountability for it. And he said, look, if I have to fight 3, 4 eliminators to try to get the fight, that's what I'll do. And he's pretty much done that at this point. So I get that entertainment-wise, yes, it's probably not going to be a very entertaining fight. But at the end of the day, he's doing what he's got to do, And if we trash, or if we can't trash Canelo for fighting a mandatory in Yildirim, who lost his last fight and became a mandatory. He lost to Chris Eubank Jr. and was the mandatory. Now, that was my argument. I defended Canelo all the way through that undisputed run he had last year. And I said, hey, look, he's going to be fighting 3, 4 times this year, right? Let him get this one out the way, and then he fights Saunders, Plant, boom, becomes undisputed. But we can't say, you know what, it's a mandatory there, and then when Benavidez puts himself in position to be a mandatory, like it should be, I feel like it should be the same energy. You know what I'm saying? That's the way I feel about it.
So just to touch on that real quick is, who never watched the Yildirim fight? This guy right here. I've never seen it because I didn't.
It wasn't a good fight.
I didn't support it. I didn't support it, but to me, it's apples to oranges because I knew Canelo was going to fight less than 3 months later. Like I trusted his activity. So I said, you know what? I'm skipping this one. I'm going to go take my wife out to dinner tonight and I'll catch Canelo again in less than 3 months because Canelo has a track record of staying active. But I don't trust that Benavidez is going to fight again in 2022. I just don't. And that's the key difference. One of the key differences, because there's several with those two fights examples, but I don't trust that he's going to fight again in 2022. And when Canelo announced this 3-fight deal with DAZN, I said, I don't trust that Charlo, Benavidez, Andrade, that these guys that missed out on this 3-fight deal are going to be very active in 2022. I think they're going to get their one showing in. They're going to show face against somebody who's not that hot. And then they're going to wait till 2023 until the next 2 or 3 fight deal rolls around. I believe that's going to happen. So that's my problem with this is I know I got to watch Benavidez tomorrow night because this is my only shot, even though it's a crap fight, because I don't think he's going to show his face again in 2022. And his track record, man, it just comes down to track record. These guys have a track record, and I'll get to that in a minute. I'm sure. But I just wanted to touch on that point. Go ahead.
No, that's a good point. PBC, they don't do the greatest job of keeping their guys busy, you know.
Mm-mm.
And look, if Canelo's gonna exercise his mandatory position, I mean not his mandatory position, I'm sorry, rematch clause with Bivol, and he's got every right to do that. He's got every right to do that. Now, according to Bivol, at this point, he has not done that. Bivol is saying he doesn't think he can make 168 now. So there's still a lot up in the air with Canelo too. He was supposed to fight Triple G.
And let me say this too: like the mandatory process is good. It's there for a reason, and it's good when it works. Like in this case, Lemieux should be nowhere close to a number 2 contender, so that sucks. But to me, the mandatory process works best when you have a deserving fighter who isn't getting his shot. Like he's being avoided for a certain reason. So let's look at an example. Indongo. Indongo finally gets a mandatory in Russia. He wins that fight. Then he gets a unification fight in Scotland. And then he leverages all that into an undisputed fight in Nebraska against Crawford. But he never gets any of that if he's not the mandatory. So the mandatory serves a purpose, right? Like when it works for a fighter that deserves it, it's good. It's good. But in this case, Benavidez loses his strap on the scale. And then less than 2 years, and he's ranked number 2, so he's deserving of having a mandatory, right? So that works. I just wish it was against a better opponent. And this is another point that I want to make is let's not act like the WBC mandatory is Benavidez's only pathway to Canelo. It's the easiest pathway.
Yes.
And it's also the cheapest because he's only getting paid $350 for this fight. I think it's $350,000 is his purse. So he would have made bigger money fighting other names in the top 10, and he had other guys in the top 10 who were willing to fight him. So it's not his only pathway to get to Canelo, but it is the easiest pathway to get to Canelo, becoming the WBC mandatory. And it doesn't – look, Canelo has 4 straps at 168. So just because Benavidez is the mandatory for Canelo doesn't mean that he's going to be the one to get the shot at Canelo next at 168. So keep that in mind too.
No, and that's very true. D-Style here is making a comment towards you. He says, there's 4 sanctioning bodies though, Calix. Not crazy to think Lemieux is top 3. 4 sanctioning bodies, top 5 is really top 20. Yeah, I mean, with all the belts, it's all mixed up. And to be quite honest, I don't even know how the hell they come up with these rankings. I asked a friend of mine who used to be a professional how it works. He didn't even know. So it's it's almost like the iPhone, the cloud, the iCloud. No one knows the cloud. No one understands the cloud. No one understands where these rankings happen. But yeah, I just say this, like, there is a good chance that he probably won't get that Canelo fight this year if he does decide to fight Bivol again. But at least he'll have that in the holster and say, hey, look, I'm this guy's mandatory now. He's got to fight me if he wants to remain undisputed, right? If they're going to now, and from what I understand, he has a good amount of time to fight that mandatory, right? I think it's like 18 months or something like that for a mandatory. They could, the champion can say, okay, well, let me take care of something else over here or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But what I want is for him to get that position to say, hey, look, I'm here. I'm your mandatory. Let's make a fight for that strap. And I also add this to that. And I'll ask you this, and I'll ask the chat. In my opinion, David Benavidez is not only the most competitive fight for Canelo at 168, but I also think it's the most lucrative fight at 168, unless Bivol decides to come down. And that's still, we don't know. But he's got himself a nice following in his hometown there in Phoenix. The last time he fought there, place looked pretty packed. I'm anticipating the same thing tomorrow night. And he's a Mexican American, a Chicano, whatever you want to call him. Canelo is from Mexico. That's a rivalry in itself right there, So to me, it's the most fascinating, most competitive, most entertaining, and most lucrative fight for Canelo, in my opinion, at 168. Do you agree or disagree?
Disagree with the lucrative part. Now, best is subjective. That's subjective. It depends on what you think. And, I could see Benavidez presenting some stylistic issues, definitely more so than Charlo, definitely more so than Andre, for sure. Not more than Bivol or Beterbiev, in my opinion, but lucrative, no, because you bring up that he's a big draw in Phoenix. Well, Charlo's a draw in Houston. A lot of guys are draws where they're from, right? I mean, a lot of guys are draws where they're from. So you can look at Omaha, Nebraska for Crawford, Errol Spence. And look, Caleb Plant was a draw in Nashville. Outside of Nashville, nobody knew not too many people outside of boxing knew who he was. And I would claim the same thing for Benavidez. I'd say as far as fanfare, Benavidez is on the same level as Plant, I would argue, as far as the casual fans and what they know of these guys. So I don't know if it's more lucrative. I don't know if I agree with that. And as I stated in the video, I just think that Benavidez and Andrade are popular with some people in the boxing world because they're used as tools to devalue Golovkin and Canelo. Like, let's throw out Andrade for an example. Andrade was gonna go overseas, move up in weight, and fight a top 10 super middleweight in Zach Parker. And by the way, the odds were close in that fight. Like, that was close to a toss-up fight. Zach Parker is ranked somewhere between 8 and 9 in the division. Some even have him as high as number 7. But I didn't hear anybody speaking about that fight. The Andrade superfans didn't even speak about the Zach Parker fight, so much that when the fight was postponed originally, nobody even talked about it. And then when it was canceled, nobody even knew it was canceled. The fight was canceled earlier in the week.
And he canceled. Okay, yeah. I'm confusing with the other guy at 160 that he was supposed to fight. What's his name?
So this was Zach Parker
or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
So this is the Zach Parker fight. It was supposed to happen, I believe, this week or the next week, but it was canceled. And none of the Andrade fans are telling me what's going on with his shoulder. Like, I'm asking questions like, how serious is his shoulder injury? Is it bad? Does he need surgery? What's going on with? None of them have any answers. So I have to assume that these guys aren't as big of fans as Andrade as they're letting on. I just think that the only time they speak about Andrade is when Golovkin or Canelo's name is mentioned. And I feel like it's the same way with Benavidez. Like, I don't think Benavidez has these amounts of fans that people are talking about. I think people bring up Benavidez's name to try to claim that he's some sort of boogeyman that Canelo has been tiptoeing around. And I just don't buy it.
Yeah, I got frustrated with the whole thing when it all happened at 168. Now, you guys know my rule. I don't like to say that fighters duck, things like that. But I'll say this, Calix, like, the narrative that Canelo didn't want to fight for that WBC strap when Benavidez had it. Only when he lost it on the scale, then he wanted to go after it. We kind of just said, okay, look, whatever. He lost it on the scale. That's his fault. He fought the mandatory in Yildirim, went on to become undisputed. Fine with that. But it's just going to open up that can of worms again if Benavidez does become the mandatory and he just decides to not fight him, That's going to open it up again. Like, well, he's the mandatory now. He's got to fight him. And I'll address his comment, Kid Top Skull, where he says, does it do better than Triple G? Look, we don't know what Triple G is going to do. If that fight happens, I would say no. I would say that's probably a more lucrative fight. But is he going to move up to 168? Like, we don't we don't know. We don't know what he's going to do. Right now, Triple G is a unified champion at 160, So there could be some work for him down there. I was hoping Manguia would fight him, but he's fighting I
think there are three more lucrative. I think there are 3 more lucrative fights for Canelo, and I don't want to make this too much about Canelo. It's hard to separate them because the only time these names are brought up is when Canelo's name is brought up. That's my whole point. But I think that Triple G is the most lucrative fight right now between 160 and 175, despite what people think. Golovkin's the only one that the casual fans know out of all these guys we're mentioning.
Yes,
I would agree. Bivol rematch, obviously, that's a bit more lucrative fight. And then I think if you put the Charlo fight in Houston, if he fights Charlo at 168 and you put that in Houston, I think that's a big fight as well. So I think all 3 of those fights are more lucrative than the Benavidez fight, in my opinion. But look, I mean, I'd love to see all of those fights. Yeah. I'd love to see all of those fights. And this isn't me trashing Benavidez just to trash Benavidez. I'm not a fan of fighters. I'm a fan or a detractor of fighters' actions. So I'm past that point in my fanhood. Like 10, 15, like 15 years ago, I was Kodo tarded. Like, it didn't matter what Kodo did. Like Kodo was fighting like he could fight a middleweight and drain him down to 154.1 and fight for the middleweight title. And I was going to make up an excuse for him, but I'm past that in my fanhood. Like it doesn't matter to me at this point. I just want the best fights, and I'm a fan of their actions, or I'm not a fan of their actions. So to me, Canelo has earned the benefit of the doubt from me, and these other guys have not, because they're just not fighting each other. Because I'm not hearing. I keep asking these questions, like, why isn't Charlo fighting Benavidez? And nobody has an answer for me. Why
Same
isn't
thing.
Andre?
I say the same thing. Yeah.
Why isn't Andre fighting Caleb Plant? Caleb Plant says that he wants a rematch with Canelo. Well, you got to earn it. So why isn't Caleb Plant fighting Charlo at 168? Why is Charlo fighting Selecki? And by the way, Munguia doesn't get a pass. And I want to like Munguia so bad. Just like I want to like Tank so bad, because they're entertaining fighters who knock guys out. But Munguia passes on a handful of guys and then lands on Jimmy Kelly, former quarterback of the Buffalo Bills. Like he's not even in the top 20 in the rankings, G-Funky, and he lands on him. He doesn't get a pass. Like he doesn't get a pass.
I don't understand that move at all. Like if you're Munguia, you're a Golden Boy fighter, you work with the zone. Triple G is on the zone. He's a middleweight unified champion. Like, why not go after him now? He's 40 years old. I think if you're not going to go after him now, you're probably never going to go after him, and you're going to lose an opportunity to become a unified champion.
And I have to give Jamal, by the way, some credit for that, because he signed the dotted line on the Munguia fight, and Munguia signed on the dotted line. It was Golden Boy saying we can't do this fight unless the zone is involved. So I got to at least give Charlo credit for that. He wanted the Munguia fight.
Yep. And I'll read this comment here where Cheeto says it's true. It changed a little because Benavidez has been doing plenty of interviews, both English and Spanish. So I would put Benavidez higher in fame. D-Style here as well says Benavidez versus Canelo does well because it will be promoted Mexican versus Mexican or Mexican-American versus Mexican. And that's a rivalry. I mean, we've seen it plenty of times throughout the years that all of us have been watching boxing. But I would just say this, like, I agree with you. It's not the best matchup. 100% I agree with you to Lemieux versus Benavidez. But at least he's doing something proactive to put himself in position to become a mandatory for one of Canelo's belts. And that's saying a lot more than these other guys, It's saying a lot more than these other, like Charlo keeps saying he wants to fight him, and then it's like, well, yeah, I'll move up and fight him. And the next it's like, I'll fight him at a catchweight, or he's got to come down to 160.
He's got to have a vaccine.
Yeah, like you're out of the picture now, man. Okay, you're making too many excuses. All right. If he becomes a mandatory, then it's like, hey, at some point it's got to happen. I'm not saying it's got to happen this year, because if he decides to fight Bivol again, which he's contractually obligated to do that, if he exercises that clause, then there's nothing I can do. Even though I don't want to see that rematch because I don't feel like the fight was competitive enough to see it again. But a contract's a contract, and it's got to be honored. I would still like to see that Benavidez fight, maybe 2023 May or something like that. I think it would be a really good fight, and I think it would be big. And as far as the fans go, like you're right, guys have hometown, followings. I agree with you on that. But Benavidez, his following is the closest to Vegas. And those fans, they could travel. It's not that far, Arizona, where he lives, to Las Vegas. If they wanted to follow and go there for that fight, it could be a pretty mixed crowd, nice crowd there for, again, Mexico versus a Mexican-American. Would be a big fight, man. But that's just my only argument, is that if we're going to give Canelo the okay to say, you know what, fight Yildirim, even though he's a mandatory that got put there coming off a loss, then Benavidez putting himself in position to be a mandatory. We should keep the same energy and say, look, he's your mandatory. Let's get it at some point, Here's the good news for Benavidez is he's going to be in the mix in 2023 for a Canelo shot. Very much so. And I think what I hope happens for Benavidez and what I think happens for Benavidez is very different.
I want to see Benavidez fight multiple times in 2022. I don't think that's going to happen. I want to see Benavidez after the Lemieux fight fight another top 10 guy. Now, you're saying Morrell Jr. hasn't done anything to deserve the shot, but what has Lemieux done to deserve the shot? And then you can make the same argument for Canelo. Canelo could say, what has Benavidez done to deserve the shot at me? So it works. It works both ways.
Yeah,
Canelo
and
looks
I
at
would hear the
Benavidez
same.
the way Benavidez probably looks at Morrell Jr. But there are guys in the top 10 for Benavidez to fight. So what I want to see as a boxing fan, and sometimes for me, it gets frustrating that Canelo is involved in all of this because Canelo paralyzes all these guys. All these guys want to do the bare minimum and then back into have the big payday fall in their lap. And it's frustrating because the big fights aren't in the division are not being made because of it. The top fighters in the division are not fighting because of it. None of them want to drop the bag. None of them want to fumble it. None of them want to take a chance. But I want to see one of them take a chance and earn that fight. And to me, beating Lemieux is not good enough. Beating Lemieux and becoming the mandatory for the WBC, to me, is not good enough. It doesn't do it. I want to see one of these guys beat a legit top 10 guy in the division. And that's the frustrating thing about Andre is if Andre would have went through with the Zach Parker fight, that's a top 10 win in the super middleweight division for him off the bat. But I want to see him fight twice in 2022, and I want to see him fight. Look, all these guys are about to be available. G Funky, Charlo's about to fight. Benavidez is about to fight. Andre, if his shoulder is okay, he's available. Caleb Plant, from what I see, is available. They're all available. Fight each other.
Yeah, I'm not against any of those fights. I seen an interview recently with Benavidez where he was asked, like, okay, what do you want after this fight? Right. And he mentioned, hey, look, I'll be the mandatory for the WBC. So I want a shot at Canelo, obviously, right? If I can't get that, I'll take Plant. I'll take Charlo. He's talked a lot of shit. If he wants to move up, I'll fight him. And he said, look, if not, I'm going to 175, you know? And I wouldn't be mad at that. Now, Morrell, you brought up Morrell, and the reason why I said what I said about Morrell is because if we're not going to give Benavidez the benefit of the doubt or whatever for becoming the mandatory by beating Lemieux, which is out of his control at this point, right? He didn't place Lemieux there. He's just doing what he's got to do to get there. Fans they just won't be happy if he beats Morrell. I could just already hear it. Well, he beat a guy with 6 fights who fought nobody at this point, which is true. He only has 6 fights and he hasn't fought anybody. Now, look, I think Morrell's a really good fighter. And if that fight happens, it happens. Now, I want to play you. This is the interview we had with him right here. And let's listen to what Benavidez said when he was asked about David Morrell. So here we go.
Thoughts of David Morrell, another PBC fighter. What are your thoughts on him, David Benavidez?
He's a good fighter, man. He's very technical. He's very fast. He has that good Cuban amateur background style because he came from Cuba, right? He was in the Cuba. Yeah. So he's a great fight. He's a great fighter too. Obviously that would be a great fight to make happen, and it can happen too. We're in the same promotion company, and obviously we're in the same weight. So that would be a great fight to make happen too.
So we got a receipt there, and I like to keep receipts, man. So let's just say that's a possibility of that fight happening. And if Benavidez is like, well, I'd rather fight somebody else, I'll have to pull this receipt out on him and say, hey, look, you told us you would fight him. You told us, hey, it's a good fight. And I don't think he would not take that fight if it was presented to him. But I just have a feeling that most fans out there would not give him credit for that win because they would say exactly what I just said. He's fought nobody. He's only fought 6 fights.
Yeah.
D-Style here says Lemieux has only lost to a prime GGG and Saunders recently. Yes, who was stylistically a nightmare for him. Bangers give David a chance. I think that's what he's saying, and that's true. That's one of. Could you agree that? Yeah, but could you agree that Lemieux is probably top 3, if not maybe top 2, one of Golovkin's best wins of his career?
Well, it depends on if you're counting Canelo as a win, right?
Well, technically, we'll go off of what's official. He didn't beat Canelo.
It could. Murata's up there. In my book, the first Golovkin, the first Canelo fight would be the top, but Murata's up there as well. So off the top of my head, he would be fringe top 3. Yeah, but that was
I
a
think
long
so
time
too.
ago, and that was
Yeah.
at a lower weight class too.
And
He had more
look,
power. His power is going to show more at 160 than it will at 168, and he's going to have problems setting it up.
I think the problems setting it up. I agree with you on that. He's going to have a hard time with the speed, and like I said, the broken up rhythm that Benavidez fights in, the way he changes up his punches, I think there's nothing the kid can't do offensively. He's special offensively. You know, he does so many things. D-Style says David had to step down a level of comp and work his way back up. He lost the belt at the scale. You can't lose the belt at the scale and get title contention just like that. I agree. And that's why I'm saying, like, look, he's had 3 fights now since then. He's made weight every time, and now he's there in an eliminator. I say
he looked
good with
super dry yesterday, but then coming out in at 166. I mean, if you come in at 166, man, like either you misjudge, but he doesn't look like he misjudged, right? Like he looked good today at 166. Now he still looked thin and dry, but I'm sure he's going to rehydrate well. So I think he learned his lesson. There's no doubt about it, and that's good. But it takes that consistency, and to me, it's activity, right? So I want to see him fight twice this year. I need to see something after, and that's my whole point too. Is Canelo's going to be busy realistically for 2022. He's got the DAZN deal through the end of this year. Canelo does that thing like NBA players, right? Like they sign 2 to 3 year deals now, and Canelo signs 2 to 3 fight deals. And he's going to have three fights this year with DAZN, but next year it's possible that he goes with PBC and signs a deal with them, a 3-fight deal. And if he does, Benavidez is going to be a part of that deal. But what I don't want to see is Benavidez feel like he can back into that deal. Like it can just fall in his lap, right? I don't want to see that. I want to see him build up that fight. And to me, beating Lemieux and becoming WBC mandatory doesn't do enough to build up that fight. If he beats Lemieux and then says, I'm going to fight, let's say November, and then I'm going to fight a top 10 guy. I mean, throw out a name, Morrell Jr. or Caleb Plant or Andre, whoever it is, and he beats one of those guys, we got full throttle. Charlie's Angels full throttle at that point. Like we got ourselves a fight between Canelo. At that point, if Benavidez beats a legit top 5 guy at 168, if he beats any of those guys I just mentioned later this year, Canelo cannot evade a fight in May. That should be the first fight of the next deal, Benavidez, at that point, because he would have done the most out of those guys, right? So
yeah,
but I want to see it happen. I want to see it happen. Like, and that's the big, frustrating thing is, dude, I don't get satisfaction out of knocking these guys. Like, I'm not one of these guys just coming on and trolling. You know that. You know my track record, and I'm not one of those guys that just takes shots at fighters unwarranted. It looks like Benavidez is a good dude with the family. I'm happy that he's getting paid, all that stuff. I don't hate the guy at all. I just want to see, as a fan, as a boxing fan, I look out for my own interests. And anything that is an obstacle to me getting a good fight on my TV on a Friday or Saturday night is my enemy. Period.
Now, I'm right there with you, man. And I agree that it's not the best matchup. But what can he do? And this is not the first time that the WBC has done some crap. Like, I hate to keep bringing up the Yildirim thing, but like the guy was a mandatory, not just for Canelo, but for Benavidez as well when he had the WBC. He was there for so long, and for what? He got beat by Chris Eubank. You know,
what it is we all know that what happens is you give a little side money under the table, and your fighter climbs the rankings magically, right? So who is it that had the God, what was it? The six fighters are going to be able. That's at 140, I believe. 6 fighters are going to be able to politic for Josh Taylor's belt that's becoming vacant. And you better believe, as they're doing their PowerPoint presentation with one hand, the other hand's going to be under the table. Like, take this 10K under the table, right, and wash it real quick. You know that's going to be happening. It's well known, G Funky, that the rankings aren't on the up and up.
It's not the most consistent thing, that's for sure. But what we can say is this: if he wins, which he most likely will, but you just never know in boxing.
He will.
Lemieux could
He
land
will.
something big and knock this guy out clean. Benavidez, look, his chin hasn't been tested like that against a real power puncher. So we'll see, but I agree with you. I think he's going to win, and I think stylistically this is a nightmare for him. He's going to get put in a blender after 3-4 rounds, and we'll see if he can survive.
Talented. He's talented.
Yes.
I mean, nobody can question that.
Yes.
Nobody can question, and that's our frustration, right? Is you don't want to see talented fighters wasted, and that's my frustration with Tank. And we'll talk about that next week for sure. But it's my frustration because you're almost him and Benavidez are almost a decade into their career at this point. And I see people throwing out the age excuse, like he's only 25. Dude, he turned pro at 16. He was in a title fight 3 years ago. He's ready. He's been ready. And Tank, the same thing. Tank turned pro early, but he's ready. He's been ready. It's inexcusable that Charlo, 160 Charlo, Benavidez, and Andre, I believe they have one fight against the champion combined. Maybe it might be 0, but the 3 of them combined have about almost 30 years of experience combined, multiple tons of fights, and they have one champion fought with the 3 of them combined against each other. It's inexcusable. It's also inexcusable for Tank Davis to have one top 5 guy on his resume in 9 years. Can't happen.
Yep. I've been calling for that Plant fight for a long time. There's already a storyline, a buildup for a Plant versus Benavidez. Charlo, now that's a little bit different. He's been running his mouth, but he has yet to move up to 168. And he's not even a super middleweight yet. So I'm just like, okay, whatever. If that happens, it happens. Good. Morel, I'm good with that too. Like I said, I don't put up roadblocks, man. If they're gonna make these fights, make them, But I just don't want here's what irritates me, Calix, is when Samson said, look, we want so much money to fight Andrade, right? Remember that a few weeks ago or about a month ago or so? And everybody's like, oh, he priced himself out. He ducked the fight, But again, Benavidez fighting Lemieux is in a position to become mandatory for the guy, the king of the division, the guy that sits on the throne, Canelo. So if you want me to give up that opportunity to say I'm his mandatory, he has to fight me, right? Whether he does it or not, he can say that. You're going to have to fucking pay me, right? Like a lot of you guys out there, these fanagers out there, you guys want to talk business? Well, let's talk some real business then. You want me to give up a potential huge payday against Canelo to fight Andrade, a guy who's never even fought in this division? You better fucking cash me out for this position. I'd be saying the same exact thing. I don't think he's afraid of Andrade. I don't think any of these guys are afraid of each other. But that's what I'm saying. He's in a position to not only become undisputed champion at 168, but to make a ton of money fighting Canelo. A lot more money than he would fight any of those other guys. Plant, Charlo, Morel, Andrade, any of them. So I'm not mad at him for this, I don't like the fight, but I'm not going to hold a grudge against him for it. Unfortunately, you might be right. Who knows who he's going to fight this year or at all? PBC, we know
that's
they're
the scary
notorious.
Part.
Yeah,
that's
they're
the scary
notorious for
part.
leaving these guys on the shelf,
Because look at what you just said. He's putting himself in position for a Canelo fight just by beating Lemieux. So that's my concern is just winning this fight. Does he win this fight and put himself in position for WBC mandatory, which Canelo values the WBC, I think, more than any other belt, correct? They have a good
relationship. Mm-hmm.
So it's a good position for him to be in, but will he be content with that position for a year? Because it's May 2022, and Canelo is going to be busy realistically with this deal he's currently in until May 2023. That's my concern.
Yeah, we'll see. D-Style here says Lemieux went through the WBC and earned his position. I mean, yeah, Javier, see, then this is what I mean. Javier, I'm going to tell you this again. Benavidez missed weight August of 2020, bro. That's almost 2 years ago now. Almost 2 years ago. He's made weight ever since then. We can't continue to keep this over him. He's made up for it, in my opinion. He's made up for it, in my opinion.
Lemieux earned his shot at the WBC. How is Lemieux the number 2 challenger for the WBC. How is that possible? Like, I just don't. I don't buy
yeah.
that. I don't
Those
buy
are the
that at
mil-
all.
Yeah, those are the $1 million questions, Calix. And like I said, like when I had my buddy on, who I've known pretty much my whole life, went to elementary school, junior high with this guy, became professional. I asked him the same question. I said, dude, how do the rankings work? I have no idea. I don't know. Like you just get ranked, So like, I mean, Lemieux hasn't lost since that Saunders fight. He hasn't, in my opinion, hasn't been in many wars. I mean, the Triple G fight was a tough fight for him, but it's not like it was like one of those fights. Was like, damn, he should retire after this, So I mean, we'll see how he does at 168. Power is one thing that we know doesn't leave you. We know he's got that, but he's got to land it. That's the thing.
But
and we'll see if he can or not tomorrow
so
night.
Look, the argument for 4 belts, 4 sanctioning bodies is it's a universal sport. So you need 4 sanctioning bodies. You need multiple mandatory processes in order for fighters to get a shot at the title, at big fights, because otherwise promoters and managers of the bigger fighters would never give these guys shots. And I threw out Ndongo's example. The WBA was the first. It was the NBA turned to WBA. Then in the 60s, the WBC came around, and then the IBF came around to combat American fighters not getting shots. Although the IBF today, only 2 American champions, which is ironic because initially it was set up to.
I want to address a few.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll address a few comments here from Porto. He says Lemieux is 3-0 with 2 KOs at 168. The next comment here is what I want to address more. Let me get it. He said Benavidez came at 169 for Kyron Davis fight. Now that fight again was a non-title fight. Now I had to learn this as well, that non-title fights, you can come in, they'll give you that little 1 pound grace period. Championship fights are different. You have a belt on the line, you can't come in overweight. And that's something that both guys agreed to. So that's not missing weight, but I know where you're coming from, because I thought the same thing as well. D-Style says, y'all think Triple G in his prime was great or not? Some think he beat Canelo 8-4 in the first fight, but Lemieux is a bum for losing to this guy. He says, I hear all these guys duck Golovkin, but Lemieux fought him. Yeah, I was actually excited for that fight when it was announced. I bought it. I'm not going to sit here in front. I paid for that pay-per-view. I thought it was going to be a barn burner, but Triple G decided to box. And look, great game plan. He boxed the shit out of him, jabbed him to death in there. But yeah, Lemieux, look, it is what it is, man. 3-0, 2 knockouts. They put him there in an eliminator. That's out of Benavidez's hands at this point. We gotta question the WBC, because again, they had a guy like Yildirim coming off a loss as a mandatory, and I will just never understand that for the life of me, why they did that.
His wins are against Zagara. I don't know this guy's name. I don't know who any of these guys are. He beat Spike O'Sullivan back in 18, but there's just nobody there. He lost to Billy Joe Saunders in 17, but I mean there's no shame in losing to Golovkin and Billy Joe Saunders. But look, he's almost 50 fights in. He's well past his prime. He was never a true 168 pounder. He hasn't fought anybody at 168. He's not in the top 10. He's not close to the top 10 in the weight. So that would be my argument against him. If you can find your way to argue that he got up to number 2, fine. But the fight just doesn't do anything for him. Benavidez should beat him easy at 168. This isn't Lemieux that fought Golovkin almost 10 years ago. It's just not.
No, it's definitely not the same guy. No, but I still think he can crack, and we'll see if he carries that power with him one division up, 168. Maybe that might actually help him. Maybe leaving a few extra pounds on his body, not having to get rid of that in preparation for a fight. Well, I mean, we'll see.
Hopefully, we see a good fight.
Yeah, I agree with you, Calix. So I think once he gets put in that blender, and he will at some point, it's going to be a wrap for Lemieux. So give us your final thoughts, man. And, let us know what you got going on over at Calix Boxing 2.0, man.
Yeah, check me out over there. YouTube took down my podcast from yesterday and gave me no explanation as to why. That's YouTube.
Oh boy.
But check me out on Twitter. You saw the video at the top of the at the top of the podcast. Calix Boxing 2, very active on there as well. And the website is being rolled out. I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, but the website is being rolled out next week. So you're going to have a lot of good content there because I've been really chomping at the bit to get back to writing as well. But my closing argument would be, when I say there's no value to this fight, I mean to me as a boxing fan. I'm not looking at it from David Benavidez's point of view because it's not in my interest to look at it from David Benavidez's point of view. It's in my interest to look at it from a boxing fan. I would have rather to have seen 10 other guys in the ring with David Benavidez tomorrow night other than David Lemieux. Hopefully we get a good fight, but what we have instead is Benavidez a minus 2,000 favorite in a fight that he should win easily. But hopefully boxing surprises us tomorrow night. We get a good fight.
We'll see for sure, man. And you guys make sure to, again, check out Calix on Twitter. He's hot on Twitter. This guy is on fire, man. All you got to do is drop a minute video walking in the forest looking for Bigfoot. And he's got thousands of hits, man. This guy is on fire over there. So make sure you check him out.
I might find him one day.
Yeah, don't forget, guys, if you haven't seen my latest video on the made men of boxing, right here, these 5 gentlemen right here that you see on the screen, Usyk, Canelo, Josh Taylor, Terrence Crawford, and the newly added member of the family, all right, Jermell Charlo. These are the made men of boxing, in my opinion. They're untouchable. You can't fuck with these guys unless you have a sit down, all right? And I don't think you can have a sit down on any of these guys. So make sure you guys check that out and hit the like button when you go over there. My closing argument will be, again, like I said, man, if I'm going to defend Canelo's defensive against the mandatory and Yildirim, a guy who lost his last fight and somehow got in there, right? Then I'm going to keep the same energy for Benavidez once he becomes the mandatory. Let's get that thing going. And I think it will be a really good fight, really good, competitive, entertaining fight. And I think it will do well, man, in my opinion. Now, if Canelo fights Bivol at the end of the year and Benavidez, let's hope he gets another fight. If he fights a guy like Plant, Morrell, whoever, looks good there, continues to win, the fight's even bigger by the time we get to May 2023. But I'm going to say, hey, look, that's a guy he's got to see, you know? And we should all be saying that at this point if he becomes the mandatory, man. So that's all I got, guys. And look, I also want to say this before we leave, because this is real boxing talk what goes on here, right? Calix and I, we had a disagreement on this topic. And look, he comes on, he makes his case, I make my case. You don't see no personal attacks. You don't see none of that. Well, I'm gonna go make a video about you now. I'm gonna go talk about you now, you know.
And by the way, we were also texting about gardening for like an hour before.
That's right, man. That's right.
Your lawn's looking good, by the way.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. I'm still waiting to see that centipede you got, bro. I want to check that out. Don't forget to send me some pictures. But again, we can agree to disagree and talk about it like men, and then walk away and say, hey, look, good stuff, man. You know? So for Calix Boxing, this is G Funky. We're gonna end this one. We're gonna have our beers and watch the King of Queens here for Friday night. We are out of here, guys. Peace.